Everybody, it's Dr. Eric Balcavage and Dr. Eric Riggleman. Good afternoon, Dr. Riggleman. How are you today?
I'm doing great. It's a good day.
Every day is a good day, especially when you live in Winchester, Virginia, right?
Correct. Yes.
Well, it's not bad in Pennsylvania here. And we have a special guest today. We have Mickey Trescott with us today, and she is a certified nutrition therapy provider. She is the author of a few books that I keep at the office to help patients out. The Autoimmune Protocol, the Autoimmune Paleo Cookbook, the co-author of the Autoimmune Wellness Handbook, and the most recent edition, the Nutrient Dense Kitchen. She's also the founder of, or co-founder of AutoimmuneWellness.com. So, hey, Mickey, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Yeah. I wish that I had some sunny weather to report, but can't always win. So
you know what you need? You need one of these bright lights that just blasts you while you're sitting on your computer and doing a video. That would work.
Pretend light.
So you're in California, correct?
I'm actually in Oregon. So just
Oregon.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. You guys don't get sun there, right?
I mean, May through July, August-ish. Yeah, usually, but I don't know. The weather hasn't really got the memo. So we're getting a little antsy.
All right. Well, we have you on here today to discuss all things autoimmune protocol and how it ties into hypothyroidism and everything we talk about here on Thyroid Answers Podcast. But probably the number one thing we should do is let you kind of talk about who you are. Like, we know who you are, but some of our audience members may not know who you are, and then how you got to be who you are, right?
Well, we could be here all day. I'll spare you guys the long story. So I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's. That's kind of the beginning of my story, about 8 years now. So 2011. And I was 26 years old. I was really active, healthy, a pretty typical, West Coast young person. I lived in Seattle. I bike commuted everywhere. I was into running and rock climbing and worked at a coffee shop, and life was great until I started to have thyroid symptoms. So it took me about a year to get diagnosed. I'm sure you guys have talked about it all the time in the show. When you talk to people who tell their story with hypothyroidism, it starts out really insidiously, really slow. Things like numb fingers, a little bit of hair shedding, cold hands and feet, increasing anxiety. And I just thought, I'm getting older. I'm under a lot of stress. Maybe I'm working out too much, those types of things. But fast forward to a year later, and I had full on lost my job, could not function, could not get out of bed. It really led me to a place where I was debilitated. So I had seen 6 doctors in the process of getting my diagnosis. All of them told me that I was too thin and appeared too healthy to be suffering from hypothyroidism. Even though I was requesting all the lab tests, I didn't know which ones were the right ones. I knew deep down the symptoms that I was experiencing were from a thyroid problem. And so I had to fight for that diagnosis. And then when I got the diagnosis, they said, your lab values are normal. There's nothing we can do for you. And I also got a diagnosis of celiac at the same time, which was kind of a surprise. I saw a naturopath, and while he was lacking in a lot of ways in that treatment side, he did think to test me for antibodies for celiac. And so I'm grateful that I got that diagnosis too. But none of that information actually helped me. And I went through a period of a really massive crisis where I couldn't speak clearly. I was tripping over and falling. I could barely get out of bed to go to the bathroom. It was bad. And when I went to the doctor, they said, I started going to specialists, and they said, you might be developing multiple sclerosis or lupus, but we really need to let you have these symptoms for 6 more months so that we can tell that they're consistent and we can actually get you a real diagnosis. And at that point, I was just so beaten and exhausted and demoralized that I decided to take healing into my own hands. So I started researching the impact of diet and autoimmune disease, because I had been vegan for 10 years. Up until this point, I kept asking my doctors, could this be the way that I'm eating? They all said, no, the way you eat is the best way to eat. And something inside me was like, I think the food has something to do with it. So that's kind of the beginning. The rest is history, discovering the autoimmune protocol, obviously restoring my health, going back to school for nutrition. I have a background as a chef. So, all of those passions kind of combined into the career that I have now, which is just trying to make it easier for the next person that finds themselves in a situation like I was in, where, I had no options. Conventional medicine does not have options for people who don't fit a mold of autoimmune disease or especially autoimmune thyroid disease. It's an epidemic. And through this journey, I've met countless women that have gone through what I've gone through at a young age and been told the same thing. Maybe you're depressed, maybe you're making it up, maybe you have an eating disorder. And to be met with this is not a thing from the conventional medical system. And then to see all my friends and my coworkers and, my cousins to be dealing with the same thing, it's crazy. So that's what fuels what I do now.
That's awesome. That's a great story. And sadly enough, that's a common thing that we see is stories like yours where people just kind of go from doctor to doctor and aren't getting the answers and, trying to take their health into their own hands. And that's part of the reason why we do this podcast, is to empower people, give them things that they can do without having to go to a functional medicine doctor. Yes, if those things don't work, you want to then move on to somebody who's trained and specialized, maybe get the specialized testing. But your story is really amazing, how you've kind of triumphed over this. Could you, for the listeners, just explain what AIP is? Because there may be some people out there who have never even heard of what an AIP diet is.
Yeah, so the autoimmune protocol is basically just a modified elimination diet. So it's an elimination diet where you take out certain categories of foods that have been shown to cause problems for people with specifically autoimmune disease. But there are people with Lyme and some other related chronic illnesses that have had great success with a protocol like AIP. So specifically, we remove grains, beans, legumes, eggs, nuts, seeds, and nightshade family vegetables. So these are things like tomatoes, eggplants, peppers, and then any foods that are derived from any of those ingredients. So it seems like a pretty short list, but then when you start to break out any of the components, so like, seeds, not only are you not eating sunflower seeds, but you're not eating sunflower seed oil, which is a very common ingredient in processed foods. Of course, the grains, if anyone's familiar with paleo, it's a very similar to a paleo style diet with just a few extra things stripped out. And those things that are stripped out, there's various reasons why we avoid them, but mostly it's because they are either immune stimulants. So when you have an autoimmune disease, you don't want to be stimulating the immune system. They're either foods that have the potential to irritate the gut, or irritate the digestive system, cause dysbiosis, cause any kind of imbalance in the gut, because the immune system lives in the gut. That's like its home. Anything that's going to be irritating there is going to potentially cause a problem for someone with autoimmune disease. It also eliminates foods that are commonly allergenic. So these are foods like eggs, nuts, and seeds. A lot of people have sensitivities or allergies to these foods, and they might not actually know until they pull them out that that's actually a trigger food. Again, this involves the immune system. With an autoimmune disease, you want to really make sure you're pulling all those things out. It also eliminates a lot of nutrient poor foods, because an elimination diet, and really the work that I do within the elimination diet world, is showing people that it's not just about what you're not eating, it's about what you're adding back in. So we're pulling out foods that are very nutrient poor, and then we're adding in foods that are very nutrient dense.
There's a lot there, but I think and we're going to talk about dietary stuff a bit more, but I also want to explain to everybody that, and I'll let you expound on that, is that the autoimmune protocol is a huge component of that is diet and healing and repair, but there's other components to the autoimmune protocol that move away from food. Can you explain why the autoimmune protocol, there's other pieces to it, not just food, that are really important?
Yeah, and this is kind of like when you go on a healing journey, you really have to address all of the aspects of your life. And my second book, the one that I co-authored with Angie Alt, this is what we talk about the whole book, just because we realize that everyone really wants to focus on the food, and often that's the thing that people are most willing to jump on board with, and then feel like they have the most control over. But all these other angles, so it's like how you talk to your doctor and collaborate with your doctor. So there's a medical side. With autoimmune disease, it's very complex. Most people need a medical professional, whether it's someone in the conventional system, an integrative doctor, a functional doctor, a naturopathic doctor. It really depends on the person and what kind of needs they have, but they need someone to work with in order to navigate life with autoimmune disease. You just do. So that's part of getting well, is finding that person or that team of people and integrating with them and learning how to communicate with them and learning how to advocate for yourself. Another piece is sleep. You know, all the diet isn't going to do anything if you're not actually giving your body the time to do the regeneration, the deep work. So sleep is a huge piece. Lifestyle, stress management, you know, what kind of job do you have? You know, what kind of relationship, you know, is that stressing you out? Maybe you might be over exercising like I was back in the day. There are so many areas and layers in just learning how someone is relating to their environment and how stressed out they are, how they're managing that stress. That's a whole piece. Movement, you know, how you're moving your body. We can give our bodies the materials to actually create good structure, but we also know things like walking and stretching, and also we start to compound benefits with like getting sunlight, getting exposure to air, you know, that's also reducing stress. So all the lines between these areas that we need to consider, they get a little blurry, but all of them are important. You know, and some people, I've seen people who have gone into remission from their autoimmune disease just by quitting a job, you know, by not changing their food. So food is the thing that I think a lot of people focus on just because it is something that we have an opportunity. We eat at least 3 times a day. And every time you eat is an opportunity to change the future. But also there are all these other opportunities in those areas of, you know, the medical side, informing yourself, connecting with other people, your relationships, connecting with the environment, sleep, stress management, movement. I mean, there's a whole world out there of things that are going to affect you positively. And every person is going to be individual in how they respond to those factors.
Yeah, one of those things we talk about on the podcast, and I think you'll probably agree with this, is that, you know, your cells are really what determine what happens to thyroid hormone, right? Once thyroid hormone gets to the cells, that thyroid hormone is either activated or deactivated, and that's what really triggers your hypothyroid symptoms if you have a greater propensity to have it deactivated. And the primary driver of that change or shift in thyroid physiology is cell stress, and cell stress can be triggered by foods that trigger chronic inflammation, that trigger immune activation. They can be triggered by sleep disruption. And we're talking about lack of sleep. We're talking about not enough hours of sleep, the wrong quantity or quality of sleep, not getting through all the sleep stages, staying up too late, getting up too early. All those things play a role. How you breathe plays a massive role. We know clinical research shows that if you're a mouth breather and you snore at night, you're creating cellular hypoxia, which will deactivate your thyroid hormone, trigger hypothyroidism, and even Hashimoto's. So when Mickey's talking about those things, with the frustration I see, and I just had one of these occurred to me. I did a consult with somebody the other day, and they're like, listen, I'm doing everything. I'm doing the autoimmune protocol, and they're so food focused. I'm like, what about these other aspects of your life? And they're like, huh? Because they're focused on diet. They think everything stems from diet. And definitely we get those people that are like, hey, I'm gluten-free. That's how you fix this. And it's especially getting the stress level down, and especially dealing with autoimmune issues. It's way beyond just being on a gluten-free diet, right? You agree with that?
Yeah, and totally 100% agree. And the other thing I would say is that sometimes for some types of people, the step that they need to take with a diet is actually to loosen. So a lot of people do an elimination diet like the Autoimmune Protocol thinking, if I eat this way forever, this is going to give me the best chance of success. The elimination diet, the Autoimmune Protocol, it's not forever. It's meant to be a short-term trial so that you can actually determine the foods that best support your healing process and the foods that are holding you back. So you're meant to do the elimination phase and then reintroduce foods and then have this kind of customized diet that then you can tweak as time goes on. So, when you have a period of great health, you can expand your diet, you can eat more foods. I like to do this when I'm on vacation, try some new cuisines. And then, if I don't feel good, I need a recovery period, I tighten things up. Or if I have a flare of my thyroid problem, I tighten things up. But the goal is not to just restrict forever, because that creates mental and emotional health issues. And it creates issues with like how you're going to eat with your family at Thanksgiving and your spouse and your friends. It can cause more stress. So sometimes dieting harder, especially when you're trying to use it as a solution to a non-diet problem, it's not going to work for you. So that's where it's tricky. Some people you want to be like, okay, you really need to do this protocol 100%. And other people you're like, oh, wow, you've been doing this 100% for like 2 years. And that is way too long. So we need to actually loosen up so that you have some bandwidth to work on some of these other aspects of your life that are maybe going to be more productive in getting you to the next phase of your healing journey.
Yeah. And I've definitely seen that over and over with patients that, they've read all the blogs, they've been on all support groups. They've got the diet part kind of in wraps, but they've been doing it for 2 to 3 years. And whether they saw results or not, some people aren't even seeing results. And you question that and say, well, if you didn't even notice results from it, we need to look somewhere else. There's something else that's that big elephant in the room that we're missing. Or people are afraid. They're afraid to add the foods back in, to try things because they know what they felt like before, and they're really scared that they're going to slip backwards or it's going to undo everything. And then there becomes that fear and kind of it's like an emotional, it's almost like an eating disorder for some of them, because they become so emotionally attached to not eating the foods that it's hard for them to accept to add it back in.
Yep, I 100% agree, and I think that's where, a lot of us in the AIP community have tried really hard to share that it's 30 to 90 days. That's the elimination phase. Once you go through that phase and you're not seeing success, get some help. That's the best time to find a functional medicine doctor. And the functional medicine doctors that I've referred to, they find that working with someone who's done 90 days on an elimination diet, who's done it strict, who has done the work to find out if they are sensitive to foods or not, once they go to that doctor, all of the low-hanging fruit or most of it has been dealt with the dietary change. So a lot of times people have a better nutrient status, their blood sugar balance is better, they're sleeping better, their digestion is better. They might not see any movement in the specific thing that led them to doing the protocol, but it's so much easier, I know, for you guys to work with someone that has a few really clear issues that you can say, okay, we can attack this, instead of having to start too soon with someone who is like off the street eating a standard American diet, has like out of control blood sugar, like, it gives you guys a starting place that is actually going to be most productive. So that's why we really try to advocate for the idea that the elimination phase is a phase, it's temporary, and then you move on to either reintroductions, because you've been so successful at reversing the things that you went into it for, or you go into troubleshooting because things aren't falling into place and you need help, and there are things that people need help with, like infections are a big one. Diet isn't going to fix an infection, so people have all kinds of things where, they have a parasite or they have a yeast overgrowth or they have SIBO. These are things that the diet is, if you do it for 2 years, you're not going to be in no different shape than if you do it for 2 months. So having someone involved that can actually treat that and then they can move on is really important.
Yeah. And I would say that the anti-inflammatory and autoimmune protocol just as you said, is a great tool to start, at least reduce one of those potential factors. Let's kind of narrow that. If you've already handled that, then we know that, hey, that piece is pretty well handled. Let's move on to the next piece. And you can, especially when it comes to costs of tests and money, you can really save quite a bit of money by just kind of walking your way through that process. Not necessarily how do I want to say it? It is a simple process to go through, but it's not easy. I mean, most people say this is too hard, and I've got a list of questions that people are going to potentially bring up or ask when they do the autoimmune protocol. But the reality is, this is something, for the most part, you guys have put together some amazing resources to help people get through this piece of it, to at least kind of start that workload, so we don't have to start from ground one. Because definitely that transition from standard American diet to this can be one of those things where people go, huh?
Well, and also that's not really the type of thing that I think is appropriate for a doctor to be helping their patient with. The doctor needs to be doing a test for the infection and figuring out how to treat it, to be seeing if they're on enough medication or what type of medication, and figuring out how to change their dose, not trying to teach them how to cook a sweet potato. Because let me tell you, there are thousands of people on YouTube. There are tons of websites that will teach you how to do those things. And I talk to practitioners all the time who are like, you know, I want people to do this diet, but the implementation is so hard. So that's where I think we can really work together, is just, you know, all the information is out there for people. The hard part is actually getting them to do it, because, you know, unless they've got a personal chef in the budget, it's, you know, they're going to have to learn how to do it for themselves. But, you know,
And that's probably the better long-term thing, though.
Totally.
Right?
It's sustainable. They learn how to cook for themselves. They learn how to select foods. I mean, like I said before, you eat 3 times a day. Like, you're going to have to figure this out at one point or another.
And there's almost like a personal satisfaction when you learn how to do it. It becomes more satisfying to make your food. You become involved in it, you know, and I 100% agree with you. It's getting people to use the resources. I mean, I can't tell you how many countless patients I refer to your book. You know, your book was one of the very first ones that I read when I was investigating the AIP diet. And I refer people to go buy that book, or just type it into Google. There's thousands of recipes you can find for free on the internet, or YouTube videos. And it's just getting people, I know, but I don't have time to do that. And there's every excuse underneath the sun, but the resources are out there. You just have to be willing and open to trying new things and put in the time to essentially practice, because sometimes the foods that you make will be pretty terrible.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a learning curve, but I see it as, you know, the people that do it are the ones that are motivated enough by their illness, and just by their future. If they don't want to continue feeling the way that they do, then usually they're like, oh, this is a good trade-off. Like, I put in time and energy to learn how to do this thing and change what I eat, and then I get a better quality of life, hopefully for the rest of my life. And, you know, if someone's not ready to make that choice, that's totally up to them. But I've seen some pretty incredible things, as I'm sure you guys have, in the potential of what people can do when they really take ownership of their health journey, and they understand that, you know, it's on them to figure out how to implement and integrate and make everything work. They can have a great medical team. They can have a health coach. They can even hire a personal chef. But if they don't take any ownership or responsibility for their own journey, it's really hard to be successful.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So let's get into a little bit of the autoimmune protocol. You talk about that the autoimmune protocol is really 2 phases, right? And 3 stages. So I know I've had patients say, what? So can you explain those 2 things?
Yeah, so basically there's elimination and reintroduction. So I've talked about which foods were eliminated, but basically during the elimination phase, you're doing 100% compliance. I know that things like 80-20 are kind of all the rage right now. And I agree, from like an optimal health for like otherwise healthy people, that, you know, moderation is a good idea for most people. But for people with autoimmune disease, who have chronic illness, who are looking to really identify allergens or sensitivities, there is nothing less than 100% that's going to actually make you successful. The immune system really needs the time to rest. It needs no inputs from the potential triggering foods for at least 30 days. I like to say 60 to 90 days is the best shot. And then at the end of that phase, so you eliminate all the foods. For most people, this means that they're cooking everything at home and they're not eating at restaurants, which is very tricky. But when they're done with the elimination phase, they assess. Hopefully during that time, you've been doing some journaling, you've been doing some sort of tracking, you have some sort of measurement of how you've progressed. So, you might notice that you had a bowel movement every other day. So at the end of 90 days, you might be having one every day. That's an improvement, So you kind of make a list of all your improvements and then decide, do I want to start reintroducing foods, or do I need to start troubleshooting? So you go towards reintroductions if you're feeling really good about where you're at, you're feeling like a lot of stuff was resolved or moving in the right direction, and you have measurable improvement. So if you don't have measurable improvement, you're not going to know when you reintroduce foods if they're negatively affecting you. If you're not having measurable improvement, or you're having a little bit of measurable improvement, but you feel like you need more in order to move to reintroductions, you move to troubleshooting. So troubleshooting is where you get hooked up with a provider. Sometimes it can be someone who is very familiar with AIP. Sometimes it can mean that you're just going to go to your conventional doctor because you have some ideas just from educating yourself about what could be wrong. This is really common with people with SIBO. So maybe they went on AIP, but they realized that when they eat asparagus and onions and garlic, they're getting really bloated and they're still having digestive issues. They might go to their regular MD and say like, hey, I'd like to get a breath test for SIBO. They might find a functional medicine doctor to actually rule out some other stuff based on their history. So that's the troubleshooting phase, which is just getting someone else involved. And then sometimes they'll get treatment. So for me, what my troubleshooting phase looked like, I worked with a naturopath. I got diagnosed with H. pylori and I had a parasite. And so we had to treat both of those things. And at that time, I stayed on AIP. I still kept working on nutrient density. And sometimes when you treat those things, then you go back to the elimination diet and you find that it's a lot more effective, right? Because some of those underlying roadblocks were kind of removed. So say someone starts feeling better, they have measurable improvement, they're not doing troubleshooting, then they move on to reintroductions. So during reintroductions, you start to reintroduce foods we have lots of charts. So if this seems really nebulous, the way I'm explaining it, there's full protocols in all of my books. It's all available for free on my website and the whole AIP community website. One thing I love about the AIP community is everyone believes there should be no barrier to access to this information. So it's all out there for free. But basically, there are 4 stages of reintroduction, and we start with the foods that are most nutrient dense and least likely to cause a reaction. And then we move on in stages to foods that are most likely to cause a reaction and least nutrient dense. So the idea is we want to add back foods like nuts and seeds actually have some redeeming nutritional qualities that, some nuts are really high in certain minerals. If they work for you, you're going to want them back in the diet. They're also really good for like snacking and for traveling. There's also things like egg yolks. Egg yolks are very nutrient dense. They actually have like choline that can actually be kind of hard to get otherwise. So egg yolks are pretty high. Ghee, not a lot of people find that that form of dairy, that's like the most tolerable form of dairy, and especially grass-fed pastured dairy has really good unique nutrition. So people can start introducing ghee stage 1. So you start with these foods that the nutrition makes them attractive to a long-term diet, but also we want to set people up for success in moving through the reintroduction process. So then as you move down the scale, stage 4 foods are like not traditionally prepared gluten-free grains, or things like oats or like beans and legumes, or nightshade family foods, which people with autoimmune disease have a really hard time with nightshades. If you guys have any takeaways from this conversation where you're like, oh yeah, I kind of knew that like grains are a problem. For people with autoimmune disease, like nightshades tend to be a really big trigger. So especially like tomatoes, I don't know what it is about the tomatoes, but they're stage 4. People have problems with them, Things like drinking excessive amounts of alcohol. I mean, there are a million reasons why that's not going to be good for anyone, but, we don't want to put that stage 1 because, the people that are reintroducing stage 1, they're really trying to just expand a nutrient dense diet. The people that get down to stage 4, you've been doing the reintroduction process for maybe years at this point, and you're trying something and then being like, oh yeah, this really isn't a good idea for me. Like, actually, for me, last week, I had some oats in something and I was like, I haven't had oats in like 4 years. And immediately I started getting reflux and I was like, okay, I don't do good with that food. I've known that, but every once in a while you kind of try something. So reintroduction, while elimination is this small phase that you do it and then you move out of it, reintroduction I almost think of as kind of like the rest of your life. You're playing with different boundaries of your diet, and sometimes you're kind of being a little more outside the bounds, and sometimes you're being a little more safe depending on how you feel. And it's very individual. Everyone's protocol looks different. Everyone's reintroductions look different. It doesn't line up very neatly based on disease. So yeah, hopefully that wasn't a too complex answer to that. But
do you have a specific protocol that you like to recommend people use when reintroducing foods back in, like how many days you should be eating it? I know there's so many different variations of it.
Yeah, so every AIP book should have a very close version to the reintroduction protocol that Dr. Ballantyne outlines in her book, The Paleo Approach. It's in every single one of my books, I think, besides the first one, and it's on our website. But basically, you take a little bit of the food, you eat it, you wait 15 minutes. If nothing happens, you can have a little more. You wait like 3 hours. If nothing happens, you can have a little more. Then you wait 3 days, because sometimes food reactions can be delayed. And then you make that decision if that food gave you a reaction over that 4 or so day period. If you're someone who's really sensitive, you can extend the process to be like a food a week. If you're not very sensitive, or you're introducing a lot of really related foods, so this happens with like seed spices, you don't want to be doing like cumin and coriander, and it would take years if you just did everything like one food a week. So some people speed up those foods just because there's a low likelihood that they're going to be a problem. But really the process, we have structure, but then everyone kind of makes it their own. And when I work with clients, I adjust the reintroduction procedure a lot. And then if someone has a negative reaction, you really have to stop and let yourself get back to where you were before you reintroduced foods. So this can be, especially when you're self-guiding, this can be some of the harder parts of navigating an autoimmune protocol, is just kind of figuring out if a food works or not. Sometimes it takes more than one try.
Yeah, I think one of the things that maybe we can have you talk a little bit about is most people consider the fact that if they're going to have a food sensitivity, food reactivity, it's going to be GI, right? Well, I don't have any food problems because when I eat food, my bowels move every day and I don't get any gas or bloating or pressure. So I don't have a reactivity to that. Can you speak to that a little bit more of what things to look for potentially from a food reactivity standpoint?
Yeah, so it can be anything. It can be anything from mood swings. It can be, irritability. It can be sleep changes. So actually something that, a personal story that I'm going through right now, I just had my anniversary with my husband last weekend. We're celebrating 12 years married. So we've gone out a couple nights in a row. I don't drink very much, but I had one drink 2 days in a row, and I have an Oura ring, which tracks my sleep. And both days I slept 8.5 hours, which is my normal amount of sleep. But my Oura ring told me when I woke up that I got almost no deep sleep and almost no REM sleep. So I was in bed, I was in light sleep, but I actually did not get restored those nights. So, that is a food reaction. I'm reacting to the alcohol that I put into my body. And so where I might not have like a obviously negative reaction, where I notice I went to bed at my normal time, I woke up at my normal time, I felt a little sluggish, like my brain wasn't working that well. But that constitutes a food reaction, so I know that I'm impacted by that. So some food reactions you can decide, if it's worth it. Like for me, the joy of celebrating a big milestone with my husband is worth that. A couple days of not having optimal health. Sometimes people get things like rashes. Rashes are pretty common. You can get obviously the GI stuff, so like reflux, you can get bloating, you get indigestion, diarrhea, constipation. Honestly, like anything can be a food reaction. And I think the things that people are most surprised by are the mental and the emotional effects. When I'm glutened, even though I'm a celiac, I don't have any gut symptoms from my celiac disease. I get all brain and neurological symptoms. So I start not being able to form words. I start forgetting things. I get really emotional. So I'll start crying about anything. Often my husband knows faster than I do, because he's like, wait a minute, could we have had gluten somewhere? But I think that is really surprising to people, to just know when you're eating the right foods, people tend to be a lot more emotionally stable. They fall asleep when they need to fall asleep. They stay asleep all night. I mean, waking in night, a lot of people don't think that that could be a food reaction. I've had a lot of clients that that's happened to them. So yeah, it can really be anything.
I think that's the key. I think so many patients consider that it's going to be a GI symptom, but we've seen, and I'm sure Dr. Erica would agree with this. I mean, we've had patients with chronic back issues, chronic neck pain, that think that their chronic back pain is a back issue. And you talk to them and say, listen, you've been to 5 specialists for your back. You've had MRIs, you've had cortisone injections. There's a high probability that your back is where your brain perceives the problem, but the reality is it could be anywhere. But that's key, is to understand that you can have any type of symptomatology. And what you need to be aware of, and why the autoimmune protocol is really important to eliminate that stuff, is if you're still consuming something that's creating those symptoms and you reintroduce something, you still may be in such a state that you can't even perceive it. So being off of those things really strictly really helps to understand the impact of foods when you bring them back, and look for anything, whether it's just itchy skin, your nose is running, your eyes water, dry skin. It could be anything and everything. And I know patients say to me, well, what should I look for? I'm like, anything that changes, right? Any changes. I don't care if your tongue starts to be a little bit more burny, that could be it. Or if your ears are constantly itching, or you have more earwax all of a sudden, it could be anything that your body perceives. So that's really important. And the sleep disruption key is really key too, because if you're doing things that are triggering more inflammation in the body, you're going to be more, especially your body's going to probably be more perceptive of that at night, because as you lay down and tissues, that's going to create more inflammation, more pain, narrowing of your breathing pathways. It's going to disrupt sleep. It's going to wreak havoc on you. So be aware of anything.
Yeah, I think being in tune to your body is really, really important. And, in our society, sometimes we lose tune of, what's actually going on. And we just think, oh, that's a normal symptom or that's a normal side effect. But being in tune to notice little changes, because it could be so subtle, and you want to be able to recognize that, and you don't want to ignore it when you're adding those foods back in. So just being in tune is really important.
Yeah, and Mickey had a great idea. I mean, the Aura Ring, I've had both the Aura Ring and now use something called the BioStrap. Things that monitor your HRV and maybe your sleep patterns and things like that can really give you insight as to how things that you do during the day, whether they're physical, they're chemical, they're emotional, they're dietary, really can impact sleep cycles and your rest and recovery. So if if financially you have the ability to have a tool like that, they can really help you understand, especially during that anti-inflammatory diet or the reintroduction of those things. You can say, all right, I didn't notice anything, man, but my HRV and my sleep was disrupted. What else went on today? Nothing else was out of the ordinary. Well, then something was having an impact, and you might not have noticed it at all, but these devices can really take a look at what's happening with your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems and really give you insight as to what's going on.
Yeah, for sure. And I would say before I got the tracker, I just used a piece of paper, and I like to track number scales. So if anyone wants to do DIY, pen and paper tracking, you can say like morning energy. How do you feel every single day when you wake up? Give yourself a number 1 to 10 and track that over a month. You can track it at different times of day. This is great for people with Hashimoto's like me who, we have energy fluctuations. Sometimes you're like, oh, how's your energy? And you're like, oh, great, I could take on the world. And then 2 hours later, it's just like you're crashing, and, you feel like you're carrying around a ton of bricks, and you need to go take a 10-minute nap to just like, plug in your phone or whatever. And so I think taking that number scale is really helpful, because then you can look at that over the course of a month or 2 months or 3 months and really see how that's changed. A lot of people don't understand that day to day, you might not notice a big change, but when you do 30 days and you look back at day 1 and you're like, oh, my average was about a 6. Now my average is a 7. That's a big progress. That's 10%. So, so tracking, if you don't have anything fancy, do the pen and paper, track numbers. You can track whatever you want: digestion, mood, energy, all kinds of stuff. And that really will help people tell how they're progressing.
I think it's a great tip. All right, so you ready for some questions?
Of course.
This is the newly diagnosed autoimmune patient, thyroid, whatever it is, they found your book, or they've come to a functional medicine practitioner who said, hey, you got to follow this autoimmune protocol. And the first thing they say is, how am I going to eat? You're essentially eliminating everything from my diet. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, I'm going to break this person into two types of people. So you need to assess yourself, and you need to figure out if you're the person that's slow and steady or cold turkey. So the cold turkey person is like, I am really suffering with symptoms. They're the person that I was 8 years ago. I will do anything tomorrow in order to end my suffering. And if you're that person who's like, yeah, I got to throw away everything in my fridge and start over and learn a new way of cooking in a matter of days, great, do the cold turkey, print out the lists, clear out your pantry, go grocery shopping, cook a bunch of stuff, and start. Those people are rare. I will tell you, they're very rare. Even though I'm one of them, they're not common. Most people fall into the slow and steady category. So they're the ones that when you look at the list, you're going to be like, I know I need to do this, but I am so overwhelmed. So what you want to do is you want to work backwards from the goal, which is full elimination. And every week for about 6 to 8 weeks, eliminate one food group. So it might look like starting with gluten. So go gluten-free. Don't worry about the rest of the triggers. Yes, they're probably not good for you. But if you have maybe a spouse who's not on your side, you've got a family to feed, like kids that are eating other stuff, you don't have the time and the space in your life yet to dedicate to cooking. These are all changes that are going to take time. So start with things like gluten-free. Once you've got gluten-free down pat, take the dairy out. Once you take the dairy out, take all the grains out. Once you take all the grains out, so you're basically taking one step at a time towards the elimination diet, and with a goal that maybe in 30 to 60 days, you're fully compliant, and that's when your 3 months start. So yes, it's going to take longer, but for someone who is overwhelmed, I can tell you, the overwhelmed people, when they do the cold turkey, they white knuckle it for 3 days, and then they say, I can't do this. I don't know how to cook. The food's too expensive. I don't have the time to do it. Nobody's supporting me. I give up. And you don't want to be that person. You want to set yourself up for success. So in that 1 to 2 months of transition, you learn how to cook some recipes that you like. You learn how to batch cook. Batch cooking is something where a practice that I've done from the beginning. I used to do this before I was sick for my clients, for my personal chef clients. I would go to their house and I would do a big grocery haul. So I would buy a ton of groceries. I would make 5 or 6 dishes, and then they would have food for the week. When it came time for dinner, they would just heat and serve. So you could cook a chili, you could cook some salmon, you could roast a whole chicken, you could do a tray of vegetables, you could prep a salad. You can do all that in the span of a few hours. There's a little learning curve. You have to learn a little bit about cooking, but I've got all the recipes. I've got YouTube videos, you can figure it out. And then you don't have to cook for the whole week. You have all the food in the fridge. So when you're hungry and you're like, oh no, I'm hungry, what do I do? Those people that haven't set themselves up with food, they're going to look at the food list on their fridge. They're going to open their fridge. It's going to be empty. And they're going to be like, oh crap, what do I do? But the person who's batch cooked is going to open their fridge and they're going to have some bone broth. They're going to have some roast chicken. They're going to have some vegetables. They've got something that they can eat. So learning those skills, I think, is one of the first steps to making the implementation go smoothly.
All right. You ready for number 2?
Yeah.
All right. I got this autoimmune thing. What am I supposed to feed my family?
Yeah. Yeah. So you'll drive yourself crazy if you're trying to feed your family different stuff than what you're eating. So a lot of this food is palatable for kids and for spouses. It's if you make the food seem weird and you feel like you're doing this really weird, unusual thing, people are going to treat you like you're being weird. So my first advice is just don't be weird about it. Don't let your spouse or your kids think that this is some weird thing. Just have them explain to them that you're doing something so that you can feel better and that you need their support. And the first thing that you're going to do is make a meal for everyone with an element that everyone's going to like. So say your kids like chicken, maybe you make a roast chicken, and then maybe you make a side of vegetables. And if they're going to not eat all the veggies or something, they can have a side of something else that they can, if they're big enough to prepare their own, or if they want to eat bread, they can have, their dinner rolls or whatever, that they're eating that with their chicken, but you're going to be eating the AIP veggies. So learning how to combine, say you make an AIP chili, you make a chili for the whole family, your husband and the kids have some bread with their chili, or they throw cheese on their chili, or they put hot sauce in it or whatever, fine, that's their meal. But that doesn't really take any extra input for you besides providing the hot sauce or the bread. You only had to cook one dinner that night. So learning basically what everyone's going to eat, what the common denominator is, making that the focus of the meal instead of making a unique meal for everybody, because you're going to drive yourself crazy doing that.
All right. Ready for another one?
Yeah.
You did really good so far. The next one is, I feel like I'm bored with the food. I'm eating the same foods every day.
Yeah, I love this question because I love to tell people that they are so privileged to be bored with delicious, nourishing, nutrient-dense food. People need to get over leftovers. If you want to heal your body, and the worst thing about it is that you're going to have to eat the same thing a few times a week, like either learn how to cook gourmet, fresh food for yourself every single meal, or learn how to love leftovers. And so, you can remix things. Sauces are great. One trick that I do is I'll prepare 4 or 5 sauces in a batch cook. So I'll do like a turmeric sauce, maybe a chimichurri, maybe some sort of basil pesto, maybe like a green curry, and then I will freeze them in ice cube trays. And then once they're frozen, you pop them out, put them in a plastic bag or a glass storage container. Say you've got leftover chicken and veggies, pull out one of the turmeric cubes, throw it in the skillet to heat it up. You've got turmeric chicken and veggies. The next day you've got your chicken and veggies, throw in a pesto cube, So there are creative ways. If you're someone that's like really like, I cannot have the same thing over and over, you can trick yourself that way. For me, that's too much work. I am super happy to just cook a ton of food and eat it over and over, because honestly, it keeps me healthy. I feel great doing it. I can spend my time doing other things and not cooking. So it's that trade-off and kind of like where you want to find in that balance. I feel bad about a lot of barriers that people have to eating this way, but just being bored with leftovers is kind of not one of them. We are very privileged to have access to incredible food in this country. So
And I think the crazy thing is, if you ask them what they ate prior to starting this protocol, it would probably be the same 5 to 10 foods over and over again.
I ate cereal every day with milk.
Right.
And you're like, okay, well, how come you weren't bored eating cereal or toasted for breakfast every day? Like,
Yep.
So.
Yeah. So, and that was exactly the point I was going to make, Erica, because we hear these things on our end all the time. All right. Ready for another one?
Yep.
Eating this way is just so expensive.
Yeah, it is expensive if you go to like Whole Foods and you buy all your meat at the meat counter and you buy all the organic vegetables out of season that are like shipped in from New Zealand and South America. So you got to be clever if you want to get high quality food on a budget. And so the first tip that I have is to get your meat not from the store. So investing in a deep freezer, going direct, buying from a farmer, it's super outside the realm of what most people, how we've ever bought meat. You're going to get a third of the price most of the time that you will get at the store. And often the quality is higher. So eatwild.com has a directory of farms everywhere. You can plug in your zip code. You can find a farmer near you. Yes, you have to like buy 200 pounds of cow or pig or whatever you're buying at a time, which is a lot. But you can do this with fish. So I get a salmon CSA. It ends up being $10 a pound for a wild caught Alaskan sockeye. The store is double that, The beef that I buy is raised by a neighbor. It's $6 a pound for fully grass-fed, grass-finished local beef. And I get the T-bones for $6 a pound, Right. So really hacking the proteins, that's where people are going to make the most cuts in their budget, is just by going directly to the farmers and creatively sourcing. Even the big box stores, so if you don't have a farmer near you, even Walmart is starting to have high quality foods for bulk. So if you have a big freezer, you can take advantage of that. With produce, eating in season is really important. There's a whole nutrient density side to it, but then there's a whole budget side of it. So like we're coming up on berry season. I like to go to the U-Pick farm with my whole family, and we have a challenge. How many berries can we pick? And then we freeze all of them, and we're still putting berries in our smoothies. We haven't even eaten all the berries that we froze from the last year. And they're like $2 a pound for organic berries that we've picked ourselves. It's this fun activity. We get to go outside. So just think of things like that you can do to make the most of the access that you have and the food that's ripe in the summer where you live. So here in Oregon, the herbs are great in the summer. I like to buy tons of basil, make a bunch of pesto, freeze it. It's practically a weed here in the summer. So just think about those kind of things, and you can really make it work. You just have to put a little bit of effort and a little creativity into it.
And I think we need to add to that too is that if you're buying and consuming nutrient dense foods, what you're going to start to find as you do more of the autoimmune protocol or eat a more whole food diet is you're just not as hungry as often.
Mm-hmm.
You're just not eating the same volume of food. You're not going through bags of potato chips. You're not going through a lot of, loaves and loaves of bread. You're just not eating the same volume. And I've noticed that significantly is that you start to see people as they start to eat more nutrient dense food, they're like, I only really feel like I need to eat once or twice a day.
Mm-hmm.
Do I have to eat that? No, if you have extra body weight on board, you have reseurces.
Mm-hmm.
And what you want to see is that your body starts to unlock those resources. So yeah, the actual cost per item might seem like it's more than you would typically pay, but you're not buying all those extraneous cookies, candies, chips, and pretzels, and all those other things that you would constantly consume. So it actually, long term, I think it does wind up being more cost effective to eat this way. All right, I want to give you one more, and then we'll start trying to wrap this thing up. And that is, all right, Mickey, I got your book. I got diagnosed. I went to my medical doctor to kind of talk to him about this autoimmune thing. And he said that I don't need to do any of that, that the autoimmune protocol or his anti-inflammatory diet doesn't really work. There's no such thing as gluten intolerance. None of this really matters. I can eat any way I want as long as I take my meds.
Well, that's a really common story that you hear from people that talk to their patients. So there's a couple angles. So if you have Hashimoto's thyroiditis or you have IBD, so Crohn's or colitis, we actually have medical studies now showing that the autoimmune protocol is effective, at least in pilot studies, for helping manage those conditions, whether, if someone's on medication or if they're not on medication. I'm sure you guys have seen the studies that we've partnered with, and there are more coming. So if your doctor says there's no research about this, you can show them those studies, especially if you have those diseases. I think everyone needs to be marching in their gastroenterologist's office with that IBD study and educating them, because we could really get that timeline down of suffering for a lot of people that are newly diagnosed with those conditions. Unfortunately, those are just a few autoimmune diseases out of over 100. So, it's going to be a long time before we know on paper the effects, while we know anecdotally how AIP has changed people's lives. And so part of that, I tell people to inform their doctors, because informing their doctors about what they're doing. So say you tell your doctor, okay, I'm doing AIP, and the doctor says that doesn't work. And then you come back in 3 months and your disease is in remission, or you don't need your medication anymore. And then you can then remind your doctor, like, hey, I think this is working. And they're probably going to say, actually, like, that doesn't matter. It's just a fluke. There's such a thing as spontaneous remission, whatever they're going to say. But you never know when that doctor, their curiosity is going to be sparked. And actually, the IBD study came out of that exact situation. So a doctor at Scripps, a gastroenterology researcher, had that experience with a patient. And then instead of dismissing her patient and saying, oh, no, that's not a real thing, she said, where do I learn more about this? And the patient sent her to our website, and that's how we got connected to her. And she had funding and wanted to do a study, and it was an incredible experience. So don't discount what sharing about your experience to your doctor, even if it's falling on deaf ears. You don't know what's going to happen with that and what's going to happen with that information. And that doctor might turn around, have a few patients have the same thing happen to, and then be like, maybe there is something to this. And that's how we change the system, right? That's how we get medicine to start progressing in a direction that we know it needs to go in order to manage this healthcare crisis that is just, I don't even want to go there. It's so big, it's it's a nightmare in what we're in for, just both in cost and quality of life. And just, it's crazy. So, so yeah, talk to your doctor. Don't be mean to them about it. If they dismiss you, if you know in your heart it's something you want to do, you have the capacity to do that, because, doctors can't tell you what to do. They're there to advise you. They're there to give you information and to help you find your path. But ultimately, you're the one that makes the decisions about your body. So,
Yeah, and I would add to that, unfortunately, most medical doctors, those in the allopathic community, weren't taught about nutrition.
yeah.
They weren't taught about functional disorders. They were really taught disease identification, diagnosis, and then treatment. And so this whole nutritional thing, even this functional disorder idea, really is maybe a foreign concept to many of your docs. So I would say the vast majority of doctors are in the business for the right reason, and that's to help people. But their knowledge base doesn't really necessarily include what we're talking about here. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that we didn't even that doctors, and maybe some still do, say, hey, there's no such thing as gluten intolerance until you develop celiac disease. Well, hey doc, how did I get celiac disease if I wasn't gluten intolerant first, right? And so it's just a concept that maybe it makes sense to us, but to your medical doctor, they may not have had some of that background, that training in nutrition, or spend a lot of time reading the literature and the research to see how things have changed. So I think great point. Talk to them about what you're doing, let them know what you're doing, and then it's still your choice to work through this process, because at the end of the day, it's your health, your life, and you're the person who needs to steer that ship. I don't think you should let anybody be the person that dictates how you should live your life. We should, all of us that are in the functional medicine, medical community, coaching community, our goal is to help support you, not to be the dictator of where your life goes.
I love
All
that.
right, so let's do this. We are at the end of our hour time, so I'm going to give you 3 tips that you would give to the newly autoimmune or hypothyroid patient. What would be your 3 kind of beginner tips to give them to get started on the process to getting healthy?
All right. So if this is someone who specifically has autoimmune thyroid disease, my first tip would just be to start the diet on your own. This is something that you can do regardless of, where you are with a provider, or, whatever that next step is for you, assessing it. So if you're already gluten-free, it might be taking a step towards elimination phase. If you're just like not even gluten-free, it might be starting there. But just really starting to think about the next step for you. If you're elimination phase and you're not seeing results, then you could start to focus more on nutrient density. That's something we haven't talked a lot about in this podcast, but is an important concept. So the diet is something I would start with. The second thing is that I would make sure to connect with a collaborative provider. So with some autoimmune diseases, especially when people are newly diagnosed, sometimes they can get away with working on their own and seeing kind of what kind of results they get. With thyroid people, I really do think it's important to early on get some lab testing, take a snapshot of where you're at, and have someone there ready and happy to help with any treatment as you're starting your process. Because it's something that I've seen in a lot of my clients, is that they wait too late, and then especially if you need medication, that whole finding the right type of medication, finding the right dose, I mean, that can take a year. And so if you start that process after you've already done an elimination diet for 6 months to a year, you can feel kind of like that started too late. That's kind of how I felt on my journey. I had gone 9 months doing AIP before I found the doctor who would actually treat my disease. And then it took another year for me to actually get on the medication. So it took a while. So find that collaborative practitioner, and as far as type, it's the one that can give you what you need as far as like whatever state you live in. Some states you need a certain type of practitioner in order to prescribe medication if that's what you need. But really the foundation is that they're collaborative, that they will listen to you, that they're open-minded, that they're not just going to give you Synthroid, that they're, that they prescribe whatever will work for you. That's the person you want to work with. And then the third thing that I would say is just to realize that healing isn't linear, and to be gentle on yourself and to take it one step at a time. So it can be really tempting, especially for people who obsessively listen to podcasts and read books, to just say like, I'm going to do everything at once. I'm going to, start working with, a practitioner who's going to like jump me in on everything. I'm going to do all the diet things at the same time. I'm going to start doing a workout routine. I'm going to start meditating every day. And then all of a sudden you live in this prison that, you're not actually allowing yourself to get healthy because you're creating so much stress on doing it quickly. And so part of it is just that it's a process. It takes time. You take a couple steps forward, you take a couple steps back. That's totally normal. Just because you have a friend that did it in 3 months and they have the same disease as you doesn't mean that that's what's going to happen for you. And so be open and actually take joy in discovering what works for you, being in the moment and being grateful for the opportunity to actually be able to affect your health, whatever that may look for you. I think it's a little different way to look at it, but one that I wish that I would have had when I started my journey a little more, instead of feeling like, I just have to get healthy,
Right. Yeah, definitely a process. So great tips. So Dr. Erica, any final questions for Mickey?
No, I think we've kind of covered this really good, got some good information.
All right. So Mickey, can you tell us where people can find you, and can you tell them about the new book quickly?
Yeah, so you guys can follow me. Most personally, I'm on Instagram, so I'm at Mickey Trescott. We have an Autoimmune Paleo dedicated account that's at Autoimmune Paleo. That's fun if anyone's on the elimination phase. My account's more like farm life, and my recipes are kind of what I'm up to. I have a podcast called the Autoimmune Wellness Podcast. I blog with my partner Angie Alt at autoimmunewellness.com, so you guys can get all the info that we talked about today, recipes, quick start guide, meal plans, batch cooking video, all that's on the website. And then the newest book is called the Nutrient Dense Kitchen, and it is an AIP cookbook, but it is framed in a way to show you guys why nutrient density is the most important component of any type of eating. So all the recipes and the content is all AIP, but really I wanted to expand it to apply to anyone. So nutrient density applies to growing kids, to pregnant women, to people who are aging, to athletes. We all should have that perspective of really looking at the nutrition that's on our plates. And so there's lots of charts, graphs, meal plans, all the signature implementation stuff that I'm known for, but through that lens of just selecting the most nutrient dense foods. And you guys can pick that up wherever you can get your hands on a book.
Awesome. So yeah. we're gonna sign off. We were so fortunate to have you on. Thank you so much for coming on. We'll probably have to swing back around here. You'll probably pump out another book by next year, but maybe we get you on here.
Thank you guys so much for having me.
All right. Thanks for coming on. Take care.